Yes, so session is now being recorded. Cool. So welcome all from my side. My name is Hirvelä and I'm a creative director at Demola Global. And today we will host a session on esports. For you who are not familiar with Demola, we run future-oriented design projects where we engage university students globally in interdisciplinary teams. And we recently had one project regarding esports, and today we have one guest from that team, Aleksi Pannula, sharing his perspectives and findings what the team identified during their 8-week design project. Then we have invited two other guests here today with us, Niklas Hirvelä, especially from a coaching perspective, and Janus Pitkänen from esports business management perspective. But we will let the guys introduce themselves better. And today's moderator or host will be our beloved colleague Janne. Session will be recorded and let's have a good session. Feel free to ask any questions, drop a comment to the chat at any point, and we will take those into account. But yeah, Janne.
Thank you, Jere. Welcome everybody from my behalf as well. As Jere said, my name is Janne Eskola. I'm the Vice President of Demola Global. And I think the reason why Jere asked me to host this session is that I'm one of the devils behind the fact that we are dealing with esports themed projects in Demola at the moment. I have my personal interest in this area as well, but I've been driving this forward a bit so that we can get this theme as well covered in our projects. But before we get started, just to add what Jere said, let's try to have as kind of like informal and laid back discussion as possible. So if you have any questions, comments, please post them in the chat. We will and I'll be picking them up in suitable moments. But other than that, let's get started by introducing our panelists. Jere already shortly introduced you guys, but could you please open a bit about your own background, and Aleksi can now open a bit more about your Demola project as well. But please tell a bit about your background. How are you tied to this esports scene? And one kind of like additional question that I'm personally super interested. What was the first kind of like big game of your childhood? What was the first game that actually like you started really playing? Because I know we've all played like Super Mario for like 15 minutes here and there, but what was the kind of game that really you started spending your life with? Let's start the introduction round let's start from Niklas and then go to Janus and then Aleksi at the end. So, but Niklas, please go ahead and introduce yourself.
Yeah, I'm Niklas Hirvelä, and I'm a coach and teacher at Ahlman eSports School. So it's a school for esports students who only, study in esports. So they don't have anything else than esports, and we have students from rising stars to the top level Finnish players in international level. So it's a pretty high level esport players. My background, I have been now, this is my 5th year at Ahlman, and before that I was coach at Helsinki Reds Overwatch team. And yeah, I have vocational study at coaching, traditional sports coaching, and I was second esports coach who did that in Finland, and and the game. Well, first game where I used my time much was Death Rally, but the first esports game was like I think it was Call of Duty 2 or Enemy Territory or some of those.
Thank you. And now this is great for all the international guests. This is a kind of like Finnish branding moment as well. If you haven't checked out Death Rally, the game, please do. Awesome game from the, I think, mid to late 90s.
Yeah,
perfect.
From Remedy.
Remedy, yeah, true. The same company that made a bit, let's say a bit more A++ games later on. Cool. But Janus, please, would you go next?
Yes, thank you. So yes, as you've probably heard many times, my name is Janus, surname is Pitkänen. I work in Kajaani University of Applied Sciences as a project manager and as a teacher, and my special field of teaching is esports, and it varies from coaching to mostly business courses and like industry level general things. The first game I ever played was probably Sonic the Hedgehog, but there's this some people played Mario and some people played Sonic, but I played mostly Sonic since we didn't have Nintendo, but rather the Mega Drive then. But the first esports game was Counter-Strike, and I remember it was, I think, early 2000s, and we didn't have a good computer at home, no internet connection, so we went actually these internet cafes to play. So I started there. So my first experience with Counter-Strike was actually a local area network experience before we actually went online to play. But yeah, I think that's pretty much it.
Thanks, Janus. Yeah, I think we're the generation, at least in Finland, the generation of Counter-Strike when it comes to esports. But Aleksi, would you please introduce yourself and then also tell a bit about the Demola project that you just finished?
Okay, thank you. So my name is Aleksi Pannula, and I have studied history and this esports Demola project. It is esports for all, and what does it mean? It means that we are trying to make some new ideas how more people are getting interested in esports, and we had some solution for that. And the game, I think it's like an N64 and Ocarina of Time, Legend of Zelda.
Nice. This is kind of like spreading out nicely, that we have like the strong PC, then the older generation Sega stuff, and then the N64. How would you describe, Aleksi, like the starting point for your Demola project was about this? Let's say that esports is still relatively unknown phenomenon to people outside of the scene. Of course, the scene is huge, so that kind of like makes it easier. But for people who haven't played that much, esports is really difficult / impossible to follow because of the plethora of different games, plethora of the rules and tactics elements. The pace is huge in most of the games. Your project was partly about that. Okay, how can we actually like introduce the games even to those who are non-gamers? But what were the key core findings during your Demola process?
Yeah, we had some results, and we interviewed some people, and I personally discussed about fighting games with in this fighting game Discord in Finland, and they gave me some results and answers. And one thing was that like it is really important to these speakers who make these broadcasts, those commentators, that they explain these tactics and why these tactics are important in like Counter-Strike. Why those players did that, and what is the point of that tactics and strategy. And yes, that was the one thing.
Yeah. How would you like, Niklas or Janus? How would you like? How do you see that the role of the commentating if we compare it to the traditional sports? What is the role of commentators? Is it different? Is it the same? What kind of flavors do you see in esports commentating?
Well, I have been at the commentator at the FEL Finnish Esports League Valorant games, and I think it's pretty much same as the traditional sports. There's not so much different. Of course, well, yeah, you have to maybe, it depends your audience. How much you have to explain the game. If it's new audience that doesn't know about the games, like tactics and all, and call outs and terms, you have to be more like specific and explain what is going on and why they do that and that. But also if you have very experienced audience, it's just like that, making hype and stuff like that. But it's like in the traditional sports.
Yes, I do agree. It depends also on the game, like how complicated the game is, which also relates to as Niklas said, how well do you have to explain it to someone who doesn't know? It might be harder to make League of Legends appeal to a person who've never played MOBA games. But then again, if you play FPS games, something so-called simple as like a scenario where you have to plant like the spike or anything like that. It's like a kind of terrorist versus the police kind of setting. Everyone understands what's going on there, kind of quite fast, and what's happening. There are guns that come from real life, so you know what's going on there. But in League of Legends, it's fantasy, and there are, even though the map might be the same, but there are millions of skills, and not even the players know them probably. So basically, it may or may not add up to the commentating that if you know every name of every skill, because the players will not use the names of the skills in the game anyway. But yes, I do agree. Hype is good always, like hyping up what's happening. And yeah, of course you have to understand what kind of people who are watching. You cannot appeal to everyone. But then again, there might be different level of casters. Again, some might explain a bit better what's going on, and some might then again not explain as much because they already expect the people to understand what's going on. Yeah, I guess it's harder in that sense regarding to the traditional sports, because in traditional sports, if you watch football, if you watch ice hockey, you know the rules. You know the rules of the game, and people who watch them get the rules and understand the game quite fast. But in esports, it's not like that in every game. I don't understand anything about StarCraft 2, so it's hard for me to follow the commentators.
Yeah, this is I think this is something that we also touched upon in a previous demo project. Was this kind of what makes traditional sports tick? Well, if you take the list of the most popular sports, they are at the core. They are super simple. Football, just get the ball into the net. Basketball, just get the ball into the net. It's super simple. Ice hockey, volleyball, everything. They are on the surface level. They are super simple. Esports are not usually that simple. If they are usually boring to play. So it's kind of like the basic setup is usually much more complicated. But hey, Aleksi, sorry, go ahead.
Yes, about that explanation during these esports broadcasts. We discussed about that in this fighting game Discord, and the one answer, at least, what was that it is very difficult to balance that explanation of these basic mechanics and these advanced mechanics, and I think there was an answer that these hardcore fighting game fans can get frustrated if there is too much explanation of these basic mechanics.
Yes, and I think this is something that's common for the traditional sports as well. That if you look at the Olympics commentating, for example, they are explaining usually the real basics of the basics of some gymnastics or whatever. They are trying to kind of like keep you there. But then if you watch like sports streams online on pay-per-view channels, for example, they go much deeper into the tactics and so on. But I think this is one of the big kind of like things that esports needs to solve in a way or another. And I think now the tools are there, Twitch streams and so on. You can have noob streams, you can have like more experienced caster streams and so on. So the tools are there. Now it's just that how to implement that. Regarding that, taking us to the kind of like the next topic, and maybe the like the hot potato, whatever the topic is, but in esports in specific. If we talk about esports as a business and the business models, how do you see the kind of like the esports business changing and developing? How has it changed so far, and how do you see it developing in the future? And we could start with Janus, because you are also teaching this stuff at CAMP. So you go first.
Yeah,
How
sure.
does the esports business look like?
Well, if you look at the numbers from any research, you can see that the numbers are growing. Not only in terms of revenue, but also in terms of the viewer numbers, ticket sales. But it's kind of natural if the industry grows, usually everything within the industry grows. But what you can see usually is that you don't see how much money the companies invested in esports, different stakeholders, how much money they make. And what you can read from the news nowadays, if we touch already a bit about this sustainability thing, is that a lot of companies who own the esports teams are not actually making profit, but are sacrificing their money, investing kind of into the space, even though they're not getting anything out of it. But the promise is that this will be the next big thing, and the money is there to be collected at some point. But now I see esports as an investing space. A lot of people investing into the industry, and at the same time, it's a bit worrying if we think about what if the investment cuts short. But for now, it's growing and it's good, but it's a bit also unknown what's going to happen in the future.
Thanks. Niklas or Aleksi, do you have?
Yeah, I think two main difference, or in which are difference what has been now, is one is for team orgs, for those teams, for players, they have to understand that, you know, how the team get revenues, how they get money from partnerships and stuff like that, and the players have to also do the participate to the content making. They have to be at those videos, and they have to sacrifice their training time, practice time for the partners. And that's one thing what players have to understand, and they have been now understanding more and more that the money doesn't just come from somewhere to the teams. You have to make work for that. And one thing is also, if we think about larger scale, the e-sport is going more to the Asia. It's going to the China and India, and that is one very big thing what maybe not anyone has time, or many doesn't have thinking about it in the Western world, that actually there's more people watching e-sport at China than in the Western world. So it's a very big thing. The change is coming, so it's going to the more to the Asia.
Yeah, this was super interesting angle, this player's role, because again, and I'm using a lot of analogies to traditional sports. Some might say that you should never do that, compare esports to traditional sports, but I'm still going to do it. But I think the kind of like super interesting thing, what happens in esports is that by default, the players are kind of like entrepreneurs. They are building their own brand and focusing into their own content creation in their own channels, and they are just part of some organization. And the organizations are kind of like they are buying not only the player's ability to play the game, but also their public image and followers and everything like that. And this is a big difference, because in traditional sports you kind of like start creating those after you get to the top, and then that's a kind of like just side business, and the club tells you, the organization tells you where your photo ops will be and what are you obliged to do. Janus, go ahead.
Yeah, about what Niklas said about the Asian market, I think what came to my mind from that is that there's still a lot of untapped potential in mobile esports. And there have been a lot of companies now creating these mobile games. As you know, the standard of living might not be as high in India and or in China, and a lot of people maybe don't have a PlayStation or a personal computer, but everyone has a phone. So there is a lot more market, a lot more people to be kind of, the gaming companies can get a lot of more people invested into esports and into video games through the mobile. And I believe that the rise of the mobile esports has already started, and it is something that's gonna grow. And I believe as we again pass the torch to the next generation, who are born with iPads and iPhones and phones in general, and tablet PCs, whatever, it's going to be even bigger than the esports we know nowadays.
This is the moment when you start feeling old, that as an old PC gamer, first I was kind of like against the console esports, and now you're already talking about mobile esports. Slow down the development, let's just stop here and play CS forever. But no, just kidding. Aleksi, what kind of like business esports business related findings or insights did you discuss about during your project?
One thing could be that what I say now is that these big traditional sports clubs like Real Madrid and Barcelona and those, and they have these esport teams also, and I think they have resources much better than like in Finland. We have these ice hockey teams have these esports teams also, and football clubs. And the problem is that could be that how patient these traditional sport clubs can be on these esports teams when there could be possibility that the teams don't win that often, and what happen when these wins don't come.
Yeah, that's a super interesting angle, and especially okay if we look at Finland, at least on the CS side, the Counter-Strike side, the two best performing teams are not owned by, as far as I know, Habu and ENS are independent organizations just for esports. And then we have Helsinki Reds and Superjymy, SJ, and so on that are owned by organizations, like traditional sports organizations. How do you see this development from either from Niklas, from the coaching perspective? Does it matter to you as a coach if it's a part of like this bigger sports organization or organization dedicated to esports?
Actually, it does matter, but I think that if you have sport organization, it might, make more problems because the sport organization has that own sport, what is the number one, and esport comes after that. So many times it can make problems like, the organization doesn't have time for esports, and it's always comes second. So it's difficult. Like if you have Havu or ENS, they are just for esports. So everyone are doing the esports and it comes first. So it's much more easier. But of course, the traditional sports teams has, much bigger, team behind. So they can, make more support for the players and for the esport.
Yeah, Aleksi, go ahead.
Yes, the problem can be that when these traditional sport teams, they can have financial struggles in this COVID-19 situation, and that is possible that they have to make some cuts, and it is possible that they just quit their esport teams.
Yes, and please correct me if I'm wrong, but I think one interesting dynamic that we're gonna kind of like come to soon in the topic as well is this like player development side, that in traditional sports the path is kind of like decades old, kind of like way of doing it. You start at the age of 5 and then slowly train through the ranks, and then you have the possibility to become a semi-professional or professional player at some point, but it's a long road. In esports, it's a kind of like if you are at the top, you're at the top. If you're not, then you are in the tier X. That's it. But Janus, go ahead.
Yes, I had a take on the traditional sports team owning the teams and like having independent ownership. Actually, from the business perspective and from the sustainable business perspective, I don't think there is much difference as long as the money comes from somewhere. Some of the traditional sports owned esports teams might be as little profitable as those that are not owned by the sports teams. It's important that the money comes from somewhere. Does it come from the sports team or from the investors, or does it come from the sponsorship? It doesn't matter from sustainability perspective. If you cannot make the money yourself, it's not sustainable. And even if you lose sponsorship, you lose a lot of money to do your business, and it's the same with the investors. But if you have heavy investors behind you that are not sponsors, then I guess it might be less risky. But still, it's not sustainable. It doesn't matter if you lose money constantly. Means that you couldn't do it on your standing on your own 2 feet. So that's my take on that issue.
How do you see the revenue share when we talk about the business models? The revenue share from the players' point of view, from the organization's point of view, from the game developers' point of view, from the sponsors' point of view. Is it like are there many different models how to handle that in different games? Are there differences within games? Is it still kind of like Wild West, or does the kind of like the esports have some kind of like set ways of dealing with the revenue shares and how much do the players get, how much do the organization get? Is it standardized?
No, it's definitely not standardized because the game developers own all the IPR to their games. Some of them let the tournament organizers do more freely whatever they want, whereas some are very strictly controlled. It's a very much dependent on what kind of agreements and deals and even like how the revenue is shared probably is discussed like between the parties that make these contracts. So it's very much open for discussion, I would say, between like if you think about the primary stakeholders like the game developers, then there's the tournament organizers, professional teams and professional players, and all these have their own ways of probably sharing the revenue that they make. So it's there's not a standard that this is how it like standard line that this is how it's gonna go. It's probably a lot of discussion, a lot of I that's just how I feel. This is not based on any fact that this is I would see it going. Or let's say it's based on some fact.
Super interesting. Now that you touched upon this a bit, I have to ask a bit more specific question. What is your take on these, let's say, franchise leagues that the game developers are holding the reins and keeping really tight grip on the tournaments and the kind of like who can play the game versus then like Counter-Strike, which is basically kind of really scattered, free for all, organize your own tournaments, set up your own prize pools, whatever kind of like approach. Which one is now taking more ground, and which one is better from the esport players, the athletes, pro players perspective?
There are pros and cons for both. It's a bit of a hard question since it might not only be game developer wise, it might be community wise. For example, Riot Games has quite strict leagues and League of Legends, but then again, I think their approach with Valorant was that they wanted a bit more free system around the game. So it's not these game developers can implement different tactics around their games and kind of test out, would it be better if it was community driven, or would it be better if it was the game developer driven? And I think there is still all the game developers are still trying to find what is the most functioning system. For me as a player, community driven is I think usually better, but not always. So there is a thing that the game developers implement that they will listen to the community anyway to some extent. They cannot be fully strict and make the decisions on their own, but of course they have to listen to the community so that they wouldn't lose the players. But I don't know which one is better. Both are good if done right, so to say. Very diplomatic answer and political
Yeah,
answer.
But really good one. I think that for the last point that the game developers need to listen to the community. I think that's something that FIFA and UEFA from the football side could also consider at some point. That what if we would actually listen to the people. But
but it's at the same time it's super hard since you have the casual gamers. There's the casual pool of a lot of players, and then there are the professional players who kind of make the living out of it. And is there like if you change something for the professional players, then you also kind of change something for the casual players. So you might lose the casual players if you listen to pro players, and if you listen to casual players, you might lose the pro players. So it's really hard, and that's why there are these competitive rule sets within the games. But I think there is some work to do on that level as well.
Yeah, that for Niklas, what is your opinion or hunch, gut feeling about how are the let's say soon to be or might be pro players that you're coaching there, or pro players that you're coaching there now. What is the kind of like the overall feeling and the gut feeling amongst them that is the franchise, if we put it black and white in a way that, okay, you have the franchise really controlled systems, and then you have the free for all Counter-Strike type of systems, which is seen as a better one from the player's point of view, if they're aiming to be professionals?
Well, I think players once free, it's much free. It's good because many still remembers what Blizzard Activision did with the Overwatch, and it's almost like, they killed the lower level. So it was only the pro teams who could, play at the franchise league, and lower levels were just like killed. But I think that we are going still to the franchise leagues, and like if you take Valorant, they are like doing it like it's more open than League of Legends. But if you take Valorant and Overwatch, they are pretty same now, because if you read those licenses for the community tournaments, they are almost the same. So actually, Overwatch has become for more open-it, and Valorant has already is like, Riot can decide what to do with that. So actually, they are not very different from each other nowadays. But players want more open, more free, not franchises, but for the teams, franchises I think are better.
Yeah, it's the kind of like the freedom of doing your own career and business versus the stability of the organization that you're working with. That's the kind of like the trade-off, and then each one of us can think that from our own profession side, that okay, which do we value more, that our employer is on a stable base, or that we have the freedom to kind of like take our career where we want. And that's the kind of, again, put it bluntly, in black and white. But yeah, now that we already talked about the players, if we talk about like pro players and the path to become a pro player, I think this is one of the most interesting aspects of esports, and one of the things that those who are following traditional sports don't really understand, and it's really hard to understand how you become a pro player. Because in football, everybody knows the deal. Start before you turn 10, you train a lot, then you kind of like go through the juniors into the seniors, get a contract, get a like better contract outside of Finland, and so on. So that's the deal. But in esports, it looks quite a bit different. How would you describe the kind of like the player path nowadays? That how planned is it? How random is it? Is it just like talents popping from nowhere? How are these players being scouted? How are they found, and so on? I know this is a huge and broad question, but like, what are your take on this?
Well, I can start. I think people try to plan to, play a career and, the way to the top, but actually it's more random nowadays, because like you can start with Counter-Strike, but you can, like move to the Valorant, and, you haven't planned it, but you just do it, and there's still much to, much to work on that path. How you can start with, young age and go to the pro, and there's so many paths nowadays. So like I have a student who is now going to play a Masters Berlin Valorant Championship, and he has started at first Counter-Strike, wasn't very good, not top tier of Finnish, and nowadays he's the best Finnish player at Valorant. So there's like there was path. It was just like he did that, and it wasn't planned that way.
Yes. I also agree. There are a lot of games nowadays, and it might be harder to just set in one game. Like I like this game, I'm gonna play it a lot. But then, of course, when I played Counter-Strike or started Counter-Strike was kind of the only FPS that was played competitively. So I think the gamer's path is still kind of a lonely one and kind of like an unclear. There's rarely like a junior level support. Like if you're a kid and you want to go to play somewhere, there's not like a lot of options where to go. And then you might have already played at home a lot, so those places you can go play even with a coach don't offer you much, depending on the level, of course. But then um when you grow up, you just kind of usually play at home. There's not like a hobby team in your city in which you might play. You play with your friends, and that's how it was also before, I believe. If you're better than your friends, then you probably start playing with players that are closer to your skill level, and you find players within teams that you maybe form a new team with, kind of one step by step go forward. But it's not very clear still. As Niklas said, you might end up playing another game altogether at some point, if a chance opens up. If Valorant didn't come, so then there was no game to get transitioned in. And nowadays there are actually in vocational schools in Finland, I think like Ahlman, there are options when you get that far. But before that, there's very little options. And yeah, and as for University of Applied Sciences or university level, we are the only one who offer any kind of possibility to train and play esports alongside with your studies and actually getting accredited for it. So there's not a lot of options, and it's definitely not clear, the path.
Do you see? Would it be? I don't know if this is a stupid or too leading question, but in the esports, it's more. Everybody talks about the grind. That just put in the hours, just play 10,000 hours, and you'll be decent at it. And play another 10,000 hours, and you'll be maybe good, or at least okay. And that's the kind of like in traditional sports or whatever is being trained for a long time, everybody understands that okay, there's certain limit where the grind doesn't add any value anymore, that you start basically over practicing, you start over exerting yourself, and you start ignoring the other elements of the training. Do you see that there would be value in getting this junior pipeline going on in esports as well, starting offering some kind of opportunities at the age of 10, whether it's not like you can play at your home, but this coaching is more about the other aspects, strategic and tactical aspects of the game and so on. What do you think?
I think that it is, it's future, that in 10 years, I think we have that and it will be good. But now we don't have enough like coaches who can do it like with the best quality. Most of those junior things what now are offering are like gaming clubs, and it's not so e-sport related. Like it's not so, there's so much, we need more educated coaches, and we need like also more places where you can, train, and also we might need to, put lower prices for those gaming educations and gaming clubs and stuff like that, because now they are a little too pricey and parents don't want to pay so much for their child to play your game. So there's also that we need maybe different attitude from the parents.
Yes, I agree. And regarding that, I think when we go further, like our generation gets older, we want to put in the money. So there's that our parents or our generation parents might already want to, but beyond that, maybe not. Maybe not. It's not like a mainstream sport, and it's not introduced in elementary school as a sport. Of course, it's way different, and there are a lot of games you can play as well. But what comes to the coaching the players and the thing that there's no physical limits of playing, of course there are some, but not anything compared to football. I think the most important thing is to understand that everyone is unique. We're all unique personalities, unique in our capabilities. So some of us might find a perfect rhythm in gaming and be the best version of gamer only with 4 hours a day. Some people get the what's it called? It's kind of self-confident for playing 10 hours a day. Of course, for some people that might already start to become counteractive. But I think the understanding that you yourself you have to find, and as a coach, I would believe that my responsibility is to try to find for the people I'm coaching, like the individual way of practice. What's the best for this individual? And yeah, so I guess that's my point here. That for some people, yes, 10 hours of deathmatch, yeah, why not? But then for some, it might be that you have school, then you do sports for a few hours a week. Just the important thing would be that when you play, you are as focused and interested in the game as you can be. Because if you're not interested in the game and if you're out of focus, you haven't slept well, all that, it's all gonna affect in your performance. And finding out the optimal performance is the key. And we all have it different. That's what I think.
Yeah, there were super interesting points regarding the kind of like the parents' point of views and so on, which probably not get too much into now because yeah, we all know that has gone is going forward a lot since our childhood. That has changed a lot already, and will be changing in the future. And regarding this coaching aspects, that basically just as any I've been doing coaching on the traditional sports side, and I think the coaching at its core is the same. So you're just trying to offer tools, different kinds of tools for the players, for them to pick out that okay, this is my tool, this is useful for me. I'm gonna do this. I'm gonna do the meditation before the practice or game. That works for me, and someone else is looking at the meditation stuff and be like, yeah, this is huge waste of time. But how do you see the player? Is there a mindset change now that people are actually aware that you can be, if we compare the situation like 10, 15 years ago when people like professional gaming wasn't a thing or it wasn't an option, it was such a like small niche thing, and now it's an actual like almost a career choice already, that like even like 10-year-old can actually take pro gaming as a career choice, or at least esports scene as a career choice. How do you see the kind of like has that changed the way people approach games even in the casual gaming?
Do you mean like in general, like the general public and maybe the mainstream? Like, can you formulate the question a bit more?
Yeah. So in general, yeah. Let's start from the general public. So have you seen like, because you are dealing with esports on daily basis, you work with the scene. Has the kind of like the attitude from the general public changed in the last few years towards like what you do as a profession? Is it more acceptable? Is it still a kind of like weird thing? What kind of questions do you get?
Yeah, well, I get students from all over the world, so naturally there's a lot of difference in that. But way I've seen it in here in my colleagues and all that, like they now understand, and well, they of course have asked me that what is this and why should it be done and all that. So yes, they do understand, and they understand that it's a part of hobby for kids, and some actually get a professional career out of it, but they also understand that it's not, it's very marginal. It's still very, very marginal, like how many people will actually make a decent level income out of playing video games. But then again, I discuss with students that come from somewhere else than Finland. I think in Finland we have it good. In Finland we understand, but of course they are the country effects. We have good infrastructure. We are very technological country, very digital, so it's natural. But then there are countries that are not, and those who are more towards still farming or doing that kind of real work, so to say, I don't think they see esports as a very good hobby. In Asian countries, in some Asian countries, they really think that playing video games is a waste of time. You should work 12 hours a day doing construction or something like that. That's real man's work. So it's really dependent on the country. But in Finland, I've seen, I think it's getting better, and it's growing. Like it's not like this boogeyman in people's minds anymore. So it is like, hey, my son is playing video games. But well, then again, you might be on the generation that, okay, well, so did I. But even if you're not, you kind of take it more or less that, okay, well, everyone's kids are playing video games nowadays, so it's completely fine. I think it's seen as more acceptable nowadays.
Yeah, I think that like 5 or 6 years ago, like when we started at Ahlman eSports school, there was people who sent like threats about killing our chief of game studies because it was so wrong that you educate people to play games. So there has been like a lot of changes for attitudes, because nowadays there isn't any like critic, but yeah, it has changed a lot, I think.
Yes, and I think like maybe the people have understand that the gaming is here to stay, and people will still play the video games even without these schools, and these schools like Ahlman are really good because they educate people how to play the games. They're actually doing a service for like the society. So it's not, maybe they've understood that it's not a bad thing. It's actually a good thing that someone educates how to play and what to do.
Yeah, and regarding that, I think one of the kind of like big things that needs to still happen, or needs to happen, but would be beneficial, is this kind of understanding that when I watch football on TV, I can go and kind of like repeat the same stuff 10 times slower, but I can go and repeat it it's the same game that I play with my friends. It's more tactical, it's faster, it's better in quality. But I think there in esports there are at least some games, let's say like StarCraft or these RTS games, which are like casual playing casually that game and playing professionally that game. It's a kind of like the gap is such a huge one that you cannot even like start to understand if somebody doesn't tell you that this is another like they are approaching the game from a totally different angle than the casual gamer. So it might be really hard to also understand what is it about when my son is playing StarCraft in that room versus the like pros who get hundreds of thousands of dollars for playing that. So what's the difference? And understanding those differences might be key. Hey, I want to remind at this point, please, if you have any questions, now that we have the experts here, if you have any questions, post them in the chat, and I will be picking them up from the chat as we go along. I want to dive partly because of my personal interest. I want to dive a bit into the coaching part, a bit deeper into the coaching part. What is the role of an esports coach?
As in a team.
In a team, yeah.
Yeah, well, I think there's that old traditional version of esports coach and the new one. The old traditional version is like he's an analyst, so he just analyze games from own team or the team who is like playing against in next tournament, and that's I think the most default for the esports coaches. But it's changing now. Now it's going to the like you have to like be like more like normal sport coach. You have to think about how schedule things, and you have to think about training blocks, and you have to think about like mental things, like everything related to the practice also. It's not just analyzing the games. So I think it's going that way, or at least it's going to that way that there is different analyst and different like coach. So there's like more people doing that stuff.
What is the kind of like the basic package of support crew, so to speak, for a let's talk about these like team esports, Counter-Strikes and so on. So what is the kind of like the basic thing that you so you have a coach? What is the kind of like the background crew that those professional teams usually have?
Well, difference between the levels where we are. Like if you are in Finland, you maybe have the best teams have one coach and manager. That it's like maybe ENS is different thing, but it's like that. But if you're going to the top of the world, then there might be like 3 to 5 coaches for the team, and of course manager and maybe personal trainer, chef who done all the cookings and stuff like that. So there might be like 10 people who is doing work for the 5 people who are playing.
Yeah, I heard a term that the coaching, I don't know if it's the analyst part then, that you start to have this like performance coaches, and then the kind of like you have the coach for the team, and then you have performance coach who's trying to just like optimize things more on the background. How do you see it from the player's perspective? How do they see that kind of, because it's a team effort. How do you, like when these new things are introduced, let's say like mental, what do you call them? Psychologists or the mental coaches? No, what do you call them? It's mental coaches.
You can call them mental coaches.
Yeah. So how do you see it, like, because all of these things, I know that they have been testing, they are testing them all the time and getting them aboard more and more. If we take the traditional, like pro player who's starting their career, young player, 17-year-old, who gets thrown into this kind of organization, how do you handle that? Because before that, the player has most likely been in really, let's say, not organized environment, and then they are pretty fast thrown into these actual organizations with support and with schedules and so on. How does the mental side of the younger players, especially, how do they deal with that? How do you prepare for that transition?
It's actually pretty hard because it's so much easier in traditional sports, because people have been like, if you play football, you lost your first game in age of 6 or 7. You are used to that. There's people watching your game and you will lose. But when you are in esports and you go to the first time like into the playing, so the people can watch when you are playing, and they are like 17 or 18 or 19 years old, it's very, very tough for mental, and you have to do a lot of practice, and you have you have to do practice that they are get used to that there's people watching their game. Of course you can try some mental practices, but I think the most important thing is that they can just get experience so they can live with it.
And I think like coaching wise, if you're really good and then you get a coach, then you kind of need to get. I think what the mindset was, at least a few years back, it was that if you have a coach, it has to be credible. Like if you don't believe the coach, or the coach hasn't been very good at the game, I believe the esports players didn't believe that the coaches can help. They felt like, what can this guy? Maybe this guy can go watch few demos for me and tell how the enemies play. But I don't think the esports players kind of understood how good the coach is actually, and they didn't use it to their fullest potential. They didn't believe the coach. The believability was low. But I think it's changing now, and now there are good ex-professional players transforming coaches, though. So of course that helps already. But it depends on the mindset you go to coaching with. You have to go with the mindset that this guy is here to help me.
It's also that if coach comes to the team from from traditional sport, and he will say like, okay, I will tell you how things will be, like how we do this thing. It might be seen as an arrogant, action, that you come from outside of the esports and you are like, something better than us. So it's also what makes those difficult situations. But of course, yeah, if you are a good coach, and you can, of course, players wants coach who is also analyst. But if you have different analyst and coach, different people, then it's good. But if you are just one coach, then they also think that you are good at game, and they want that you are better than them. Of course, coaches doesn't have to be better than players, otherwise he will be playing instead of players. But players just expect that coach is some kind of god who can coach and be better than players, but still not playing that game, and it's pretty difficult.
Yeah, it's like, I expect you to be better than me, but don't take my spot. Of course, like that. Yeah, this is actually one interesting thing that came up in one of our demo processes as well. Was this kind of like that now, just in the last couple of years, there has been this one signal of the whole industry developing forward, which is that there's a lot of like positions in the esports organizations and in the business being filled by other than ex-gamers. So you actually get like professional CEOs running the organizations, and not just somebody who used to play the game and loves gaming and wants to invest all of their money into that. But you actually get these like professionals from different fields joining in, as at the moment still usually in the background crew, like media side or tournament organizing, CEOs of the organizations and the teams and so on. How do you see this development? Do you see it as a positive thing? Is it happening too fast? Is it? Would you like to see more of that in the esports scene in the future?
Yeah, I mean, of course, it's a positive thing, and it also relates to, I think, to the sustainability question that we had here today. Since I remember reading an article about ENS where ENS CEO Mika Kuusisto gave an interview. I think it was Helsingin Sanomat, but there was as they saw, Mika said that they see themselves as modern content creators. Of course, they are like the professional gaming team, but the content is what I understood is what like is one of their core competences and one of their core businesses, in addition to being able to professionally compete. So if you create content, you can then kind of also get visibility to your sponsors, your team, your everything, and people get to know you. You get more deals, you get more money that way, more gear, more anything. I would say so, definitely. And I think even like not so well-known teams are trying to establish themselves through media, especially social media. And of course, making these videos, behind the scenes videos and all that, I guess those contribute a lot to their businesses. So that's my take on. I think it's definitely a valuable thing that people in esports, you are seeing a lot more people working other than players themselves or other well, players, but they can be other business professionals who work there, and they can do their job, because players can't do everything. A CEO can't do everything. A manager can't do everything. It's too much job for one guy, depending, of course, the size of the organization. But the bigger organization you are, the more there usually is to do, and the more you have the employees. So I think it's a good thing.
I think it was Liquid CEO who said that it's easier to get like a marketing professional and teach him or her that what is esports than get an esports like player and teach him what is marketing. So he was like, you need professionals and you can teach them esports, but like teaching for the esports player what he has to do, like what is the professional thing what he has to do. It's like do like marketing or being CEO or stuff like that. It's much more harder, and I think he might be right about that. I'm not sure, of course the players have to know the game and coaches have to know something about the game, but like if you are doing marketing or you are CEO, you can just learn pretty easily about the main things what you need to know about the esports.
Yeah, maybe like I think I read the same article about the NCEO, and I think the interesting thing in that article was the kind of like the paradigm shift from being an kind of like a esports organization into being like just that we are a marketing content creation organization, and our esports, like the sports itself, is content creation. We are creating content. We want to create good content, which means that we will play better and be in the finals and so on. So like it's a kind of like it's a, on the other side, it's kind of like this sad notion that okay, this is all about the business and the kind of like the fun of gaming is killed by this crushing pressure of content creation and making business and so on. But on the other hand, I think there should be like clear separation between the business side and then the player, like the actual performance side of the team. And how do you divide that in a way that it makes sense? I think that's an interesting question for especially the bigger organizations in the future.
Yeah, but and if you think esports, it's super risky to bet everything on the performance. So what if you suddenly don't perform very well? You lose everything. But if you still have the content creation and everything, all that going in the background, so it's more or less like not putting all of your eggs in the same basket. It's kind of dividing them and doing good in other areas rather than just in one area that might be even risky or very risky.
Yes. How do you see, like, now that we have people on the line here from all around the world, and what would you say that getting into the or starting a career towards like esports, what are the things that you would say that what are the qualities that people in esports industry need to have? Are there some like general things that keep these in mind? Just as you said, Janus, that okay, it's a really volatile industry. It's a super like things are happening fast. But what kind of qualities are the organizations looking at? What kind of people do well in the business? If we don't talk about the players themselves, but the like organization and the scene around them.
Well, as in anything, I would say passionate people. So if you're really passionate, really into something, you tend to usually have the resilience to do well. And I think it's also in esports that I think the scene is so highly invested, and all the community and the people in esports are so highly invested that you will easily see that if someone is just there to just joining in and just to make quick money out of it, and then probably trying to leave. So I think this is something that has been seen in esports. So you have to be really invested in the space and really passionate. That's one good quality, I would say, for anyone to have. And other good qualities, I think, after that relate to being passionate, whatever you want to do in life in general. Like if you want to enter the scene as a marketing specialist, then probably your other passion might be marketing, for example. For players, yeah, passion again, resilience, and I think whatever kind of built up mental fortitude will help. But that helps in life in general as well. Being able to withstand hardships and not being afraid to fail.
I think one is that because you need the passion, because there's like those team owners and every chief and people in charge, they are also passionate about esports. So they also they think that everyone who works at a team or organization are also passionate and will do as much as they are doing. So if you are not passionate about esports, you can find it's a little difficult when they are expecting that you are doing more work than you are expecting that you have to do. So you have to be passionate.
Yeah, it sounds kind of like this the whole industry being in the kind of like mentally in the startup mode. Sorry, Aleksi, go ahead.
Yes, and if we are thinking about these fighting games, and I think you need much patience, and that means that if you play fighting games, that means you are going to lose very much, and there is always some better players that are and are better than you, and you have to always make progress and get better and better and so on.
Yeah, this is super interesting, like the dynamics between the team-based esports and then the each individual esports, that how do they like develop in the future, which games are going to be the tennis and golf of esports, which are going to have the biggest money and also the biggest kind of like visibility and so on. And on the other hand, how will the team-based esports there, of course, the business side is also a bit more, let's say, convoluted and it's much more volatile because the way you build the teams and so on is changing all the time. But yeah, cool. Hey, I'm running out of topics. Now is a great time to ask questions if you have them. We still have, I think, 15 minutes left. So if you have any questions, please share them, or if any of the panelists have some kind of topic that you would like to open up, please go ahead. Meanwhile, you're thinking about questions. What are the next? Do you know what are the next big esports tournaments or events coming up?
Well, next month is Berlin Masters at Valorant, based I think 16 best teams from all over the world playing, and there's one Finnish guy, Pongold, and it's one of my students also. So that's one what to watch. And also there's coming a CS Major and Stockholm, later autumn, and of course League of Legends Worlds are coming also to the Europe, but there's no, we don't know what city it will be.
I think also the international is coming up, isn't it?
In
Romania, yeah. So that is also something. I think next month.
Yes,
Yeah,
in October.
It's October. Okay.
All right.
Yeah, but there are a lot of big tournaments coming up again, and I really hope, well, that the COVID would just somehow go away and we could go and attend these nice events in their local arenas. But we shall see what happens.
Yeah. Quick question, Niklas. What team is the Finnish guy, your player, playing for in Valorant?
Ascent.
Ascent. Okay.
Yeah.
Cool.
They won the European Masters at the start of the year, and then they won the European Challengers, and I think 1 or 2 months ago, and now they are one of the 4 Europe teams at the Berlin Masters. And well, let's see how things will go.
All right, great. And regarding Janus's kind of like hope that we'll get to see the games live and the events live again. We were just talking before we started this discussion that the new arena that's being built in Tampere, that there has been at least some rumors that there will be esports events there in the future. So let's hope that we'll get some big tournaments in Finland as well in the future. Cool. But hey, if there are, there's somebody's holding their hand up. I cannot see who it is, but go ahead, Jiang.
Hi. I was wondering the career life about esports players after they retired, because in China most of esports players only very top players, they got very high income from their award, their tournament prize pool, and it's quite a huge they were talking about they can retire after 25 once they were finished their last tournament, and they got money for their entire life rest, their rest entire life, so that. But no more player just maybe they were also the top I mean the esports player, but they didn't perform very well in the tournaments, and after they retired, they have to I wonder how their career life after their retirement.
Yeah, so the career after the gaming ends. Any insights or opinions regarding that?
Well, of course, someone will go to the another work, which has nothing to do with esports, but there's also much more, options nowadays than 5 years ago. So manager or coach or commentator, or there's so much people what we need in esports that there's a lot of other options. Coach is and manager is I think the most popular for players where they want to go after the career.
Yes, and also it is true that the prize money and the money is not very, so to say, well distributed, because as was said by Jiang, if I understood correctly, the best players, if they win one big tournament, that's already millions, they can retire. But there's no middle level where you could actually make, well, you can make some money, but for example in Finland, there are very few opportunities where you can make at least like any income, or it might be very very small. But if you compare it to ice hockey in Finland, not everyone can go to NHL, but there's still a good Finnish hockey league where you can make good income and continue playing forever. But also in the sense that if there is some guy who wins a big tournament and then retires, probably he was there just for the money, right? Not passionate about the playing itself. Maybe he was just super talented or just really good for whatever reason. But usually, even if you're really good and really passionate about the game, you won't retire after winning a tournament. But then again, some people might think that, okay, this is the pinnacle, this is the peak, and I want to quit when I'm still here at the peak. So, but then streaming is one thing. If you're a really good player, you can go to the streaming career. Just open up your you're probably well known if you're a really good player, so just open up an account on Twitch and go there, and you probably get a lot of followers, like Shroud did, for example.
Yeah, and I think this is this was one of the key insights from the previous demo process that we did, was this kind of the surge in the background work in esports, that the amount of like people who are on the front, like coaches, managers, commentators, analysts, these are steadily growing, but then the amount of work that's kind of like behind the scenes in the event production, in the marketing side, in the supporting things like these casters and streamers and so on, that's like going up exponentially all the time. So the kind of like the options of making esports a career are growing hugely. Hey, there was one really interesting question from Ida. That a question from my partner sitting next to me and listening. How do you see the future of speedrunner games, etc., in the professional gaming industry? So these, would you call them? By the way, hi Vesa. But the things that could you call them kind of like niche esports or esports related phenomenon? How do you see those in the future?
I had a discussion about this in class yesterday, and I think because someone was asking if it is esports or not, because you're not playing against a human, but you actually are, since it's racing. It's kind of like racing, so there is someone you're playing against in that, even though the racer or the guy you play against might not actually be in the same game, but it's still a competition. On the take that will and how I see the future of speedrunner games, I think it's gonna remain niche, but still I think there are games that are planned to be speedrunned. So it depends on the game developers if these games will for somehow get like a high popularity and there will be new games that everyone wants to speedrun. Maybe it could get some recognition, but my take is that it's gonna be more on the niche side still.
Yeah, I think the same, that it seems that speed running, well, it will be a big hobby esports. It has big scene also, but for professional gaming, I don't think it will be big enough. Like you can be a professional, or many can be. Someone might be, but it won't be so big like League of Legends or Counter-Strike.
Thank you.
Thanks. And just as if somebody wants to get kind of like understand better what this speed running and those kind of things is, just type in YouTube or whatever video service you're using, Awesome Games Done Quick. It's a charity event organized a couple of times a year, and they have a lot of different games speed ran there. So that's a great place to get to know. And they also explain what they are doing while they're doing it. So it's not just like people playing through the games in silence. Awesome Games done quick. Check out that. But let's take the last question from Akari. That hello, I have a question too. I think the game industry in Japan is big. We have Nintendo, but I think esports is not so famous. Is there any connection between game industry and esports industry? So yeah, I think the question is that what kind of connections do you see? And yeah, I think this is interesting from Finnish point of view as well, because we have relatively we have pretty big mobile game industry in Finland. So how do you see the kind of like the connection between the, let's say, traditional game studios and game industry and in the esports industry?
There is definitely a connection. Like I think esports is in esports industry is more or less consequence of video game industry, because if we didn't have video games, naturally we wouldn't have any esports games to play. So there is at least that connection. And I think in the case of Nintendo and in the case of video game industry and esports industry, like there might be the same game developer like doing games for both. Some are more esports oriented and some are less. Like Valve make games that are single player purely for the video game industry. Then they make Counter-Strike, all these esports games and all that. So it depends, I think, how well invested the game developer is into either space. So in this case, Nintendo would need to be more interested, for example, in esports. There is the Smash Bros. And they have games. Nintendo has games that are played as esports, but Nintendo, I don't think, sees that as their part of their strategy, or at least not very big strategy. So they're more focused on making the video games and people consuming the games rather than actually the sports side of it. So it depends on the more than it depends on the industry and the industry perspective. I think it depends on the game developer perspective on either industry.
If we like think about Finland, we have a lot of mobile industry, but we don't have mobile esports. So it doesn't have to be so. There doesn't have to be connection. So like we don't have much of like esports games for the PC, but we have a big PC esport scene here. But in Japan, I know that there have been now plans for put a lot of government money for the esports. So because they have like infrastructure already, like we have in Finland for the for internet connections and stuff like that. So they just need to put money for the Japanese sports scene, and they are now doing that. I think they had 3 or 5 year plans for how, and they will like put a lot of money for that. So they are trying to get big, and like Valorant is already pretty big thing in Japan.
So are you, Niklas, taking Japanese lessons and thinking about moving there as a high-paid Valorant coach in the upcoming years?
Well, I think if you take Japan or Korean or Indian or Chinese lessons, it will be good, because I think that's the center of the esports in 5 years or 3 years. It's not in the near future when that is the center of the esports.
And Asia is the center of the trade anyway, so should have taken some Chinese lessons 10 years ago or more. I actually did too in the university, but I've forgotten all about those already. So
yeah. But hey, thank you so much for these, and I think this esports in general. And I just thought of this, like that it's incredible to even think about it, that nowadays games are developed to be esports. I think that's already like comparing to where these traditional esports like Counter-Strike, where they started from, it wasn't designed to be esports as such, but super interesting. Aleksi, go ahead.
One more thing about these esports and Japan, and I think that in fighting games, Japanese players are usually very good. And if we think about Tekken and Street Fighter and Dragon Ball fighters, and there is so much very good Japanese players.
Yes, and this is like the cultural thing is also really interesting. That what are the popular games in China, for example, at the moment? What are the popular games in Europe? South Koreans are still hung up to their StarCraft and so on. So this is super kind of like interesting how the global map will start to shape up in the future as well. But at this point, huge thanks to all of our panelists for being here. Thanks for all the people listening. We will definitely, I will try to personally make sure that we will keep esports on the map in Demola as well. And by the way, if you have interesting kind of like future related questions, research questions, or interesting phenomena regarding esports scene about the future, let us know, because those are more than valuable for us in designing the next kind of like phase of what are we interested in esports and what are the changes that we should be looking at. But at this point, I thank you all. Thanks for being here. And the next demo talk will be most probably about something else than esports, but it will be arranged in the upcoming months. Thanks, everybody, and have an awesome Friday and have a good weekend also. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you, everyone. Have a great weekend.